Hello, precious saints. The very first thing I want to share with you this morning is that as I was preparing to record this message, I heard a noise outside my kitchen window and quickly went to have a look. And there on a branch right close to the window were two little sparrows sitting close together. It was a male and a female. You know, the male is always more brightly colored than the female. The female was a little dull grey, and they looked about the same size, and they were huddled together on the branch because there is a cold wind out. And then suddenly the male one started looking for food in the beak of the female one, and I suddenly realized this is a mother sparrow and her chick, but it's a man-child chick, and the man-child chick is hungry and looking for food. Now, a sparrow, God said we are so much more worth than many sparrows. A sparrow was considered of very little worth, but God's eye is on his sparrows this morning. The world considers you of little worth, but he wants to feed his man-child company this morning. So I just thank the Lord for that lovely visual that I saw before I began to release this message. Now, I did think I was finished with the subject of the wine press when I finished the last podcast. But as you know, when we meditate on the things that the Lord gives us, I actually listened to the podcast a couple more times after I released it. The Holy Spirit is always faithful to give more depth and revelation and wisdom and understanding as we meditate on what he has fed us with, as we digest it. And he urged me to look more into the process of winemaking. That's when I discovered that there are two different processes in winemaking. There is both crushing and pressing, and they are not the same thing. Sounds to us like it would be the same thing, but oh no, if you are a winemaker, and for anyone who doesn't understand the word Vintner in my title of this message, a Vintner is a winemaker. If you are a Vintner, you know that there are two different processes, both very important, and the order of them is very important. So I want to read to you from a website that I found about making wine, just so we can lay the basic natural understanding. Any winemaking book you read will tell you that wine grapes need to be crushed and pressed. But what does it actually mean? Many beginning winemakers, well, that would be me, think crushing and pressing mean the same thing, and that the terms are interchangeable, but in fact both mean something very different. When making wine from grapes, it is important to realize you are not only dealing with the juice from the grapes, you are also dealing with the pulp, the skin, and the fiber that make up the grape. It is from these organic solids that the grape is able to provide body, color, and certain flavor characteristics to the wine. Without them, all you have is clear grape juice with very minimal qualities. This is why when a winery makes a red wine, the skin and the pulp are actually in the fermentation along with the grape's juice. Once the fermentation is almost completed, all the fibrous solids of the grapes are then removed. But how do these grapes become a soupy mix that is fermentable? And then later, how is the skin and pulp removed? This is where crushing and pressing come into place. Crushing is what's done before the fermentation. It changes the plump grapes from something you can pop into your mouth to something you can slop around in a container. Crushing the grapes is a very straightforward task. It's simply a matter of bursting the skins so that all the inner solids can be exposed to the fermentation. Enough free flow juice will release from the grapes to turn the crushed mix into something liquid, which we call a wine must. And once the wine has fermented with the solids for about 5 to 7 days, it is then time to remove all the solids. This is where the press comes in. The color in a red wine comes from the grape skin, not the juice. This is the reason that the skins are left in the must during the fermentation, so that the color can be extracted from the pulp into the juice. There are also body and aroma elements that are extracted as well, making the wine more structured and complex. Now, isn't that interesting? Joseph waited for 2 more years in the prison, and there were 2 processes that happened. I think the crushing happened during those 2 years, and then the pressing. So as we learned from that website, the period when the broken grape skin and a bit of juice and the pulp lie together in the container is when the qualities are imparted which make the wine as special as it is. And the fermentation begins, which is a picture of the working of the Spirit, imparting life, imparting resurrection power, imparting wisdom. It is the work of the 7 spirits of God. And as Joseph's hopes were crushed in that remaining 2 years in the prison, the 7 spirits of God began to work within him, releasing wisdom, releasing understanding. Remember when Joseph came face to face with his brothers later on, he said, "It was God who sent me ahead of you to prepare a place. It is not you, but God." It was not the cupbearer's fault that Joseph was left 2 more years in the prison. It was God, because God wanted to break the structure and the understanding and the natural outlook and impart to him heavenly wisdom, heavenly counsel, understanding, knowledge, and the spirit of the fear of the Lord, which brings you to a place of meekness and complete submission to the Spirit in that breaking. We see the same process of the crushing or breaking and the pressing in a birth process. First, the waters break and the amniotic sac, which is like a grape skin, holding the precious contents, is torn open. All cushioning is removed, and once this breaking of the amniotic sac happens, the baby can no longer stay in the preparation chamber. There are no longer conditions that are conducive to life in that chamber. The lease is cancelled, and if the baby stays in the womb once the waters have broken, it will die. So once the breaking happens, it's an announcement that the preparation chapter is over. And then there is a pressing that happens through the birth canal, a very narrow place, and there is no going back to your old accommodation. You can only move forward, as I said in the last message, with your arms pinned by your side, having absolutely no understanding of why you are being thrust out into this dark, narrow passage. But God knows what He's doing. The Word of God says in Isaiah 66, "Does God bring to the moment of birth and not bring forth?" The first process of the moment of birth is the breaking of the waters, the tearing of the amniotic sac. And then He brings forth through that narrow birth canal. So it's God that initiates your ejection from the spiritual room of preparation that you've been in. And you know, in a natural birth, sometimes babies are late. They don't come on their official due date. It seems to the eyes of man that the baby doesn't want to be born. And we often joke about this with women who are 10 days over their due date or whatever and extremely uncomfortable. The little person doesn't want to be born. Well, it's not always that. What it is God's perfect timing. And heaven announces when the amniotic sac tears. When Joseph was called for by name out of the mouth of Pharaoh from the prison, then the amniotic sac tore and he began his very quick journey before the face of Pharaoh. So don't worry if you feel like you're long overdue leaving your room or your place of preparation. God will trigger, usually and obviously always with the birth and the natural, a very violent and arduous journey, even though mostly it's not longer than a day of labor. One night, Joseph slept in the prison, probably on a cold stone floor in prison garb. The next night, he was sleeping in Pharaoh's accommodation, beautifully clothed in royal garments and having been raised up, acknowledged, and positioned. God can do a lot within a 24-hour period, but it is the breaking and the crushing when the end of the time of womb of preparation that is quite distressing to go through. That is why you find when a baby has been born, they mostly have a sleep because it's exhausting. The birthing process is exhausting. So I want to deal with this in a two-part message. Firstly, speaking about the crushing. And what I'm going to talk about is how it was done in ancient times, because we're not going to talk about mechanical machinery and how it makes wine. We're going to talk about biblical times and what was happening in the ancient days. In those days, when small quantities of new wine were to be produced, for instance, when preparing a first fruits wine offering, it was done by the hand of the owner of the vineyard. Now we know that God has a vineyard. Isaiah has a chapter speaking about God and his vineyard. So the preparation of a first fruits new wine offering is the personal, private work of the owner of the vineyard's hand, dismantling old structure and way of existing. So what happens first? The first thing is that the bunch of grapes is picked. This means that it is cut off from the life flow of the vine. So for those of us who are being prepared as a first fruits new wine offering, remember that the first fruits wine offering was done ahead of the rest of the harvest being harvested from the vineyard, because the first fruits belongs to the Lord. And as I've shared before in other messages, a first fruits offering must be offered to the Lord before the rest of the harvest can be brought in or consumed. So this speaks of the tip of the spear company basically going through this private harvesting by the hand of the Lord, which means going through an experience of feeling that God has left you. You're not connected to the life flow that has been feeding you all this time while you've been growing to fullness of ripeness. But I want to say to you, Your feelings are not reality at this point. God hasn't left you. He has chosen you. Many are called, but few are chosen. When the owner of the vineyard is choosing a bunch of grapes for a first fruits offering, he looks at the ripeness and the quality of the bunch, and then he chooses the ripest, most perfect bunch for the first fruits offering, because nothing with any kind of blemish can be offered to the Lord. So you haven't been abandoned by God, you've been chosen. You are his choice one. Song of Songs 6 verse 9 speaks of my love, my dove, my perfect one. The choice one of her mother. That word choice there is bar. Bar means pure in Hebrew, but in Aramaic, bar means a son who is ready to take over his father's business and operate in the authority of his father. So this first fruit bunch that is chosen is ready to be set in place as sons to operate in their father's authority and work in his business, kingdom business. So we see that with Joseph, because when he was raised up out of the prison, because of the quality of the wisdom and understanding and counsel that flowed forth to him from him to Pharaoh, he was set in a place of the son of the right hand, second only in the kingdom, and everyone in the kingdom had to submit to him. So he was a bar, a choice one. And then the breaking follows the choosing. Now, when a bunch of grapes is crushed by hand, it is the same hand that severed you from the life flow that begins to then exert pressure. The breaking follows the choosing. And you have no understanding at this point, just incredible discomfort and knowing that the hand of the Lord is heavily upon you. And one of the things that happens when the hand of the divine owner of the vineyard begins to crush the first fruits bunch of grape is that the bunch structure begins to be dismantled. Even your familiar friends are separated from you. They are all going through their own individual crushing experience. They are even thrust away from you by the pressure of the Lord's hand. You know, in the end time wine, the Lord spoke to me about a bunch of grapes, and he showed me, actually, I think it's in the book of End Time Light that I spoke about it. He showed me the inside of the grape, each grape in the bunch, as being a separate heart chamber of a holy and set apart saint, but they were hanging together in a bunch, having sweet fellowship together, but within the individual grape of their hearts, the Spirit was busy preparing the best wine. And he spoke about them hanging together, which is a term we use of spending time with our friends, having sweet fellowship. This is then those who feared the Lord spoke often to one another, and a book of remembrance was written of those who feared the Lord and thought on his names. This is that first fruits bunch hanging together. But when the hand of the Lord begins the crushing process, the structure of those that hang together is dismantled and broken. And even your friends that you've had sweet fellowship with together seem to be far from you. There's a gulf between you and these other kindred spirits. David experienced this in Psalm 41 verse 9. He says, even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate of my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Psalm 55 verse 12. It's not an enemy who reproaches and taunts me that I might bear it, nor is it one that hated me, who vaunts himself against me, that I might hide from him. But it's you, a man my equal, my companion and my familiar friend. We had sweet fellowship together and used to walk to the house of God in company. This is such a painful thing emotionally. For those who are kindred spirits in the Lord, this breaking of a tie, this is someone who you used to hang with, walk with, have sweet fellowship with, and something is happening that you don't understand and you don't seem to be able to stop it happening. Well, what it is, it's the hand of God beginning the crushing process with the first fruits bunch of grapes. Psalm 88 verse 18 says, "Lover and friend have you put far from me. My familiar friends are now darkness and the grave." Now, Psalm 88 is a very interesting psalm. It's written by a man called Heman the Ezrahite. It wasn't written by David. And Heman means the faithful one. And an Ezraite, that the root word of that means cherished company. So there again we see the confirmation that this is his cherished company. It's a faithful one out of his cherished company that is undergoing this thing that he's describing. This is the choice one of her mother, the first fruit bunch that is ripe ahead of the rest of the harvest. They fellowship together. Then the hand of God begins applying pressure to dismantle the structure of the bunch. Each grape must be crushed alone. Separate spiritual dealings, and you cannot help each other out of them. It's you in the hand of God, and it's your friend in the hand of God. And it's hard and it's painful, but you are completely safe in this process. No one can pluck you out of his hand as he begins to prepare the first fruits new wine offering. And you know that he always knows what he's doing. And there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother when you seem at odds with your friend, or you're both having dealings by the hand of God that you can't help each other with. Faithful are the wounds of this heavenly friend. As the first fruits grape bunch, you are in the hand of your faithful friend, Jesus. You may be wounded in the house of your friends. The bunch structure of those you hung out with may be dismantled, but it is the hand of God doing it, and nothing you try will reverse it once he begins the process. But I have found that understanding of his ways helps one to endure the process. And all this crushing in the hand of God breaks the skins of the grapes, the mantle of the grapes of the first fruits bunch, and gets some juice out. And then there is a period, which was described in the Natural Wine Making website, of 5 to 7 days when the grape juice and the pulpy skin are kept together. In other words, they are separate in the sense of being completely different in form, but in the same container. And it is this period that gives the red wine its color and flavor, and the fermentation begins. In other words, the working of the Spirit within begins. At this point, the structure of the bunch is dismantled completely. It will never be the same as it was before, but at least all of you are now lying in the same container together, recognizing that the hand of God is working very deeply and painfully and thoroughly with all of you, those who fear the Lord and think on his name. And you are together in this experience, and God is working deep within you with this impartation. You know, no fermentation took place in the bunch when the bunch of grapes was on the vine, even though the same elements were present. The grape skin was there, the pulp was there, the juice was in amongst the contents of the inner grape. But the grape skin must be broken, and the bunch must be dismantled, and what is hidden within must be brought out before the fermentation can begin to happen. There is no impartation by the seven spirits of God to bring forth the best wine until the bunch is crushed in the hand of the heavenly owner of the vineyard. This is something that is very deep, and many of you know what I'm talking about with what you have gone through. It's a painful process. There's no avoiding it once the owner of the vineyard takes hold of that first fruits bunch. There's been a long period of hanging in the sun, ripening together, being fed by the vital flow of the sap within the vine. The best and the choicest bunch of grapes, and then suddenly the day comes of the severing and the pressing, crushing in the hand of the owner of the vineyard. For those of you who've been with me a while, in an older message I spoke about there being in ancient times not only the Pentecost where the wheat offering was done with the 2 loaves, but there was also a Pentecost of wine and a Pentecost of oil, which is a first fruits offering of the new wine and a first fruits offering of the virgin pressed oil of the olive. And they were called a Pentecost of wine and a Pentecost of oil because Pentecost means 50th. So the original Pentecost, where the wheat harvest was brought in and the wheat first fruits offering was made, was 50 days from Passover. The Pentecost of wine was 50 days after the Pentecost of wheat. And it was always done on the 3rd of Av, the 50th day from what we celebrate as Pentecost or Shavuot. Now Av is known as a month of great mourning, sorrow and weeping because it is historically the month in which both temples were destroyed. But the first fruits wine offering was done on the 3rd of Av, the 3rd day of the month of Av, right at the beginning, before the temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av. And so we see from this that the first fruits, new wine offering from the first fruits company are harvested from the vine, prepared in an overnight personal night of trial before the hour of trial that comes upon the whole earth when the temple or the body of Christ is smashed to pieces and great persecution breaks out. What happened with Joseph? He was brought near to the king. The golden cup with the new wine in it was brought to Pharaoh, and Joseph, the golden vessel containing the new wine produced during his final 2 years in the prison, were brought before Pharaoh. And what did Pharaoh say? He said, there is no one. I think let's just read that. Hang on a moment, let me find it. After Joseph had given the heavenly counsel to Pharaoh of how to deal with the 7 years of famine that were coming, Pharaoh said to his servants in Genesis 41:38, "Can we find this man's equal, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Forasmuch as your God has shown you all this, there is nobody as intelligent, discreet, understanding, and wise as you are. You shall have charge over my house and my people shall be governed according to your word. Only in matters of the throne will I be greater than you are." What was Pharaoh commenting on? He was commenting on the operation of the 7 spirits of God flowing out of Joseph like new wine drunk from a golden cup. Joseph was brought near to Pharaoh before the days of famine and suffering in Egypt, which is a picture of the world. The first fruits wine offering is offered on the Pentecost of wine, the 3rd of Av. 7 days. On the 7th day from the 3rd of Av is the 9th of Av, which was when the temples were destroyed. So the first fruits offering of wine was brought near to God and offered in the holy place before the temples were destroyed. Remember in Revelation 11, verse 1, where John was told to measure the altar and those who worship there, but leave out the outer court, because the outer court would be trampled for 3.5 years. It's talking about the temple, God's body. It is the temple that God was instructing John to measure. The altar of incense is in the temple in the holy place. But the holy place was separated out and set apart from and protected. Those who worshipped at the altar of incense were protected. But the outer court was not. It was trampled for 3.5 years. Let's go back to the ancient times, how the vineyard harvest was processed. After the first fruits wine offering of the best bunch, the rest of the harvest was brought in. And how was it crushed? It was trampled. A large quantity was trampled underfoot. Now, to be trampled underfoot speaks of being treated very disdainfully, as if you are no worth. What does the word say about salt that has lost its saltiness? It is of no good except to be trampled underfoot. In other words, they used to throw salt on the roads when it was snowy. I mean, those of you who live in that climate know that salt can be used to stop vehicles slipping on roads. There's no other use for it. It can't be used in the feeding or the nourishing of people or the preserving of anything because it's lost its saltiness. The outer court speaks of those who name themselves as believers. They're part of the body of Christ, of the temple of the Lord, but they are connected and involved in fleshly things. The outer court was where the sin offerings were done, where the beasts were slain, and the blood was continually offered for sins of various kind, for missing the mark. The outer court speaks of fleshly believers, soulish believers who name themselves by the name of the Lord, but they are not holy unto the Lord and worshipping in the holy place. Many years ago, I had a dream which was very significant. I dreamt that there were people lined up in rows, and in front of them was a band of people dressed completely in black, holding musical instruments that were wind instruments, trumpets, and the likes. And I saw that they were going to release a sound over the people standing in lines in front of them. And I quickly grabbed 2 of my children that I knew were identified as firstborn. In other words, what is the word? They were a type in the dream of those who are appointed to be sons of the right hand. It's the firstborn that gets a double inheritance, that steps into the position of being a son of the right hand. And I took them away quickly from the environment before the sound could be released from these people dressed completely in black with black instruments. They were going to release a frequency over those gathered. And as we quickly went away from that place, there were black-dressed riders on black horses galloping towards the people with the musical instruments to participate in what they were doing. And as we walked past these galloping riders, somebody in the dream said, "This is the Jericho band." And then as we walked further, I saw that at a place which I knew was a pub, a place where people were drinking alcohol, going to drink, those black horses with black riders were in that place, and they were trampling the people in there with the hooves of the horses, and they were barreling out of the door of the drinking house, trying to flee the hooves of these black horses that were trampling them. And I knew when I woke up from that dream that it was connected to the trampling of the outer court of the temple. And the reason why I took the two children representing the firstborn away is because they were to be protected and sheltered from the frequency that triggered the trampling season for the outer court. In just the same way as the first fruits wine offering was offered on the Pentecost of wine, the 3rd of Av, before the temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av. A very interesting thing about the operation of the temple in ancient times was that when the first fruits wine offering had been offered, all the old wine that remained in storage was considered defiled and contaminated, and they burnt it. Only the vintage that was going to be harvested after the first fruits wine offering would be used in the temple for the next year of wine offerings. So this is a picture in the spiritual realm of judgment by fire on the wine that has been offered by the church in the past season. Once this first fruits bunch has been processed by the crushing of the hand of God and the pressing, and offered before him as the best wine, then there will be judgment by fire on the wine that remains to be offered to the church. And it will be dried up. There will be nothing remaining. When you burn wine with fire, anything that is liquid evaporates, and all that is left is a burnt, very dark red, very small amount. Nothing that can give life or quench thirst or minister to believers. It's considered contaminated and defiled. I'm going to stop there because I've shared a lot, and I want you to be able to get the full nourishment and impartation about what I've shared about the crushing portion of making the new wine. In the next message, I'll share on the pressing part and some more revelation that God has given me on that. But for now, beloved, just know that what you're going through, I know you've realized it's the hand of God, because nothing you do can undo or halt the process that you're going through. It is by his hand. But just know, I want to reiterate again, you're completely safe in his hand. You're completely safe in his hand. He is a friend that sticks closer than a brother, and he will complete the work he's begun, because you are part of his choice bunch. He knows what he's doing in your life. You don't need to be afraid that your life is falling apart and you've lost your way and you've made a wrong turn and you've made wrong decisions. Have faith that your life is in the hand of God and that he is working out his mysterious will within you in preparation for the season of great sorrow and mourning that is coming upon the earth. The first fruits wine offering is being prepared for the King of all kings. The golden vessel with the new wine is being prepared, and you are incredibly privileged to be a part of the choice bunch that his hand is working with at this time.